First of all, I want to bring the university community and other interested stakeholders abreast with the political situation in Cameroon. Secondly, I would like to provide the necessary historical context and intellectual perspective that will assist us to interpret and make sense of the protests in the English-speaking regions of Cameroon. And lastly, the debate is intended as a contribution to the broader and ongoing dialogue to chart a better future not only for Cameroon, but for the entire continent of Africa. So for me, the situation in Cameroon is significant and deserving of a debate of this nature for at least 3 reasons. The first is that I think we are confronted with a situation that has the potential to destabilize what has so far been a relatively stable country in a largely volatile Central African region. Secondly, of course, I think that the protests present Cameroon at large with a window of opportunity to debate and to address vexing political issues that are fundamental to the well-being of the Cameroonian state, primarily ahead of the 2018 presidential elections. And finally, I also do believe that we need to appreciate the situation in Cameroon for what it really is. That is, a reflection of the shameful legacy of colonialism that Africans everywhere must work to reverse. As such, it is my wish that our debate tonight will not lose sight of the all-important Pan-African perspective. Let me also state up front that this forum is not intended as a platform to promote a particular position, and it is our wish that while we may disagree with one another, the debate will unfold in an atmosphere of mutual respect and tolerance. We're honored to have a panel of esteemed academics and activists to lead us in this discussion. And right next to me, we have Professor Carlson Anyangwe, who is an established lawyer and teacher and researcher. He's an established law teacher and researcher. He has over 36 publications to his credit and has taught law in several African institutions of higher learning, including the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon, the University of Buea, also in Cameroon, the University of Zambia, the University of Swaziland, the University of Limpopo, and the Walter Sisulu University. And he has also served in various managerial capacities such as research coordinator, deputy dean and director in the Walter Sisulu University. He read law in Cameroon, France, and England, and holds a LLB, a postgraduate diploma in comparative law, LLM, and a PhD. Professor Anyangwe's research niche areas are in human rights law, public international law, and comparative law, with a particular focus on Africa and in relation to issues such as self-determination, boundaries, indigenous law, government, and criminal law and procedure. Professor Anyangwe is a USIA International Visiting Fellow and a member of the African Commission's Working Group of Experts on the Death Penalty in Africa. Lastly, he is an NRF-rated researcher. Welcome, Prof. So next to Professor Anyangwe, we have Professor Achille Mbembe, who is a professor in history and politics at the West Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg here. Professor Mbembe studied at the Université de Paris and Panthéon-Sorbonne and at the Institut d'études politiques in Paris, and has taught at various institutions in the United States, including Columbia University, the University of Pennsylvania, Yale University, the University of California, Duke University, and the prestigious Harvard University. He has recently been elected as a member of the U.S. Academy of Arts and Sciences. And in addition to that, he has authored numerous books in French, and most of these books have also been translated in English. His widely acclaimed book, Critique of Black Reason, won, I think, a literary prize. Unfortunately, Prof, I really can't pronounce this in German, so you will help us later with that. And so you're welcome, Prof, as well. And next to Professor Achille Mbembe, we have Milan Atem, who is the convener and facilitator of the Southern Cameroon's conclave. Milan, I hope you'll take time to give us a brief of what the conclave is all about. Equally, he's Managing Director of Gravitas Institute for Disaster Reduction and Emergency Management, which covers the entire African continent. Milan has over 15 years' experience working in the humanitarian and development sectors with the United Nations and international NGOs across several countries, including Malawi, Swaziland, South Sudan, the DRC, Uganda, Burundi, Haiti, Namibia, the Central African Republic, as well as South Africa. Welcome, Milan. And finally, we have our very own Mr. Anselm Adunime, who is a postgraduate student in the Department of Politics and International Relations here at UJ. Welcome, Anselm. And just to put it on record that we had extended an invitation to the Cameroon High Commission in Pretoria. Unfortunately, we didn't get any response from them, despite repeated effort to make them be part of this debate. So this is how we're going to proceed. We'll give the panelists 15 minutes each to do our opening remarks, after which we're going to invite inputs and questions from the audience. I had also received a couple of questions from our compatriots around the world, so we're also going to put those questions to the panelists. And I think we'll also give the panelists an opportunity to engage one another on the issues that will arise in the debate. So without wasting much time, I think we'll call on Professor Anyangwe to give his opening remarks. Is it on? Yeah, it's on.
Why does it put on the podium so they can get it on the thing?
Oh, you could put it there. Can't you? It's on.
It's on.
Hello, hello. Hello.
Okay, it's on.
It's on. Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I think it's my pleasure being here, and I thank the Department of Political Sciences of the University of Johannesburg for giving me this opportunity to make one or two inputs on the topic which we'll be invited to debate. That is what is framed as the Anglophone crisis and the future of Cameroon. By way of opening remarks, I just want to say two things. The first thing is to say what the crisis is not about. And the second thing is to confine and define the area, the territory we're talking about, which has been described as Anglophone Cameroon. On the first point, contrary to some media reports, I would like to say loud and clear that the crisis we are debating here today is not a clash between English and French. So it is not a language problem. The second thing is, it is not a clash between what we call Anglophones and Francophones. I know that the foreign media only love to see Africans at each other's throat because we like to compartmentalize people into tribes. The proverbial African tribes fighting each other. That is not what the issue here is about. Thirdly, the issue is not about fighting for posts or positions, as some would imagine. So, if it is not a language issue, if it is not a clash between two sets of peoples, and if it's not a quarrel about positions or posts, be they ministerial or otherwise, what then is the issue? I'll put it in very clear terms. The issue is simply a colonial system experienced by the people you call Anglophones. A colonial experience which I'll describe as a black-on-black colonization that has been going on for more than half a century. That is what we are talking about. So although the African Charter speaks of Africa having gotten rid of colonialism, that is simply a reference to saltwater colonialism. In other words, colonialism by the white man of the black man. But as that saltwater colonialism was retreating in Africa, sadly, we began to witness a new form of colonialism rising on the continent, where a neighboring country began colonizing and oppressing perceived weaker people who were next door to them. That's what we're talking about here. And in the course of this debate, I hope we'll be able to bring out manifestations of this black-on-black colonialism on this continent. Secondly, what is the territory we are talking about, which you all, and even the foreign media, we all love to Anglophone Cameroon? What you call Anglophone Cameroon is a territory known as the Southern Cameroons. The Southern Cameroons was a United Nations Trust territory under UK administration. I won't go back to history, but I just want for you to know that the area where these two territories emerged from, what you call Anglophone Cameroon and Francophone Cameroon, in other words, English Cameroon and French Cameroon, were once part of territories which were the German Cameroon. I say both were parts of, because they are parts of the German Cameroon, which are no longer part of this so-called Cameroon I was talking about. They are now part of Chad, part of Central African Republic, part of Congo, and so on. When the Germans were defeated in the First World War, they signed the Berlin Treaty, under which they renounced all the rights they had over their colonial possessions. There were just 4 of them on the African continent. There was Namibia. There was German East Africa. There was Cameroon. And of course, there was Togo. These were the 4 territories the Germans had. But in the infinite wisdom of the colonial authorities, they decided that these territories must be partitioned. So in the case of German Cameroon, one part, the partition, the smaller part became known as the British Cameroon because it was the League of Nations granted a mandate to Britain to administer that part. And the League of Nations also granted a separate mandate to France to administer what became French Cameroon. So you had 2 clear territories. And the existence of the British Cameroon and French Cameroon as political and legal entities starts only as from 1922, when the League of Nations granted this mandate. The British administered their own side, the French administered their own side. So what is called today Anglophone Cameroon is actually the British Southern Cameroons. Why the Southern Cameroons? Because the British territory was further divided by the British into 2, a southern part and a northern part. Why they did that? Well, they said it was administrative convenience. but colonialism has its own logic. In 1961, the United Nations organized a plebiscite in the British Cameroon, both the northern side and the southern side. And the question was, first, do you wish to achieve independence? And do you wish to achieve independence by joining either Nigeria or French Cameroon? The response in the southern Cameroon was, we wish to achieve independence and we'll join with French Cameroon. I use the word French Cameroon as a convenience term just for us to understand, because by 1961, French Cameroon had achieved independence on the 1st of January 1960 as the Republic of Cameroon. And the arrangement, the agreement between the two sides was, between the southern Cameroons and French Cameroon was, we are going to enter into political association in the form of a federation. Two states equal in status. But along the line, things didn't work out. On the 1st of September, before September, on the 21st of April, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution. The first thing it does was to endorse the decision of the people of the Southern Cameroon to achieve independence. Secondly, acknowledge the decision of the people of the Southern Cameroon to join, the word join, French Cameroon. Two separate votes were taken on these questions. The issue of independence at the United Nations General Assembly states that one Southern Cameroon to achieve independence by a show of hands. The majority said, yes, we approve the Southern Cameroon should achieve independence. Second round of voting states that we Southern Cameroons to join French Cameroon, show of hands. Majority said, yes, we want them to join. The United Nations then said, the Southern Cameroon shall achieve independence and shall join French Cameroon on the 1st of October 1961. And on that same day, the UN mandate over the Southern Cameroons was going to come to an end. I give the background so we must understand as we go on to debate these issues. And the word joining was understood by the United Nations, by the British government, by the Southern Cameroon government, and by the government of La République de Cameroon, French Cameroon, to mean forming a federation of two states equal in status. I've heard people talk about being absorbed or becoming part of. There was no such thing at all. It was a federal system which was agreed upon. But what happened? On the 1st of September, French Cameroon sat in the National Assembly, adopted an annexation law claiming the Southern Cameroons to be part of its territory that was returned to it by the United Nations and Great Britain. Remember, 1st September, the Southern Cameroons was still under British administration as a trust territory. And yet, you had a foreign country next door that adopted a law in its parliament called a constitution, claiming the Southern Cameroons as part of its territory returned to it by the United Nations and Great Britain. Then on the 1st of October, the day they were supposed to achieve independence, on the 30th of September, the British government invited the president of that foreign country next door to the Southern Cameroons and handed instruments of power to that foreign president, contrary to what the 1960 Declaration on Decolonization says. And that declaration is very, very clear. All colonizing power, I should leave, hand over power to the local people without any equivocation at all. This was never done. So, on the morning of 1st October, when the Southern Cameroon was supposed to achieve independence, that independence was automatically suppressed by two things. The law which was voted by French Cameroon claiming the Southern Cameroon as part of its territory, and two, the act of the British handing power not to elected government of the Southern Cameroon, but by a neighboring foreign country. So the people got up. Instead of independence, they found themselves now becoming a subject people, a dependent territory of French Cameroon next door. And French Cameroon lost no time by sending its colonial administration officers to the southern Cameroons to administer the territory, even in the context of a so-called federation that existed for 10 years before the open absorption in 1972. Now, the reason for giving this background is so that as we get into this debate, we must understand very, very clearly. Our situation is so convoluted that many people don't understand. They don't see this background, and it's important to give this background. I'm sorry if I've taken a bit more of your time than is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prof.
I have the feeling that the so-called Anglophone question, which needs to be, I agree with Carlson, needs to be rephrased, has given way to a multifaceted debate in the country currently known as Cameroon. How long that will last, I have no idea. But that's the name given to that territory as we speak. A kind of debate we haven't seen since the times of decolonization, the struggle for decolonization. It's a cultural debate insofar as it touches on questions of historical identities. What is it that we as Africans do with the legacies of a contested past? What kinds of symbolic resources we draw upon in our attempt to create something new and hopefully different and more in tune with whoever we believe we are. It is also, of course, a political debate insofar as it has to do with the structure of a state and the structures of power and how to redistribute it. It is also a historical debate, and I think Carlson has gone at length providing us with the historical context to what is going on right now. And we see a lot of exercises in historical rewritings going on, especially since this whole question started. Yesterday I was, in fact this morning, I was watching on YouTube a long interview, 1 hour and 40, 50 minutes, by Professor Daniel Abwa on Canal 2, which is really an exercise in historical rewriting. So everybody is in the business of rewriting history. The assumption, I suppose, being that if we manage to tell the historical truth, then that will give us ammunitions in the actual political and cultural struggles that are going on. As a critique, I have to be skeptical and say that, I mean, it's not true that finding the truth of history has always translated into political victory. Although it is important to try to establish historical truths. But if that was the case, then for instance in so-called Francophone Cameroon, the UPC would be in power today. It's not always those who have reason, who are truthful, who end up winning a political fight. There are differences between a historical truth and a political truth. So let's do this, but knowing very well that the two things do not convert into the other necessarily. The question, it seems to me, from a philosophical point of view, we are facing in Cameroon, but also here and other parts of Africa, is the question: what is Cameroon? Since whether we speak in terms of Francophone Cameroon or Anglophone Cameroon, Cameroon comes somewhere in both denominations. What is it? What are its origins? Who is Cameroonian? How do we know? How do we establish who is Cameroonian? And what are our origins? Do we have common or separate origins? And if we have common origins, where do we locate them? If they are separate, okay, we know how to find them. But if they are common, how do we locate them? Does the fact of having common origins necessarily entail that we will have a common future? I'm not sure. These questions have to be posed and debated. Now, what is Cameroon? I think Carlson was absolutely right. Cameroon is a German invention. That is the starting point. There were people living in that area, of course, before 1884. How they defined themselves, what kinds of solidarities, alliances, struggles they entertained, that's something. But in the modern lexicon, Cameroon is a German invention. Second thing, it is a German invention, a German possession, in fact, which is lost, as Carlson was saying, by Germany after the First World War. It's the lost possession of some external power. It is a lost possession that is at the same time used as a spoil of war between Germany, England, and France. It's because it is a spoil of war that it undergoes the process most spoils of war go through. Divided, amputated, partitioned, not only between Francophone French Cameroon or Anglophone Cameroon, but bits and pieces given here and there to Chad, to the Central African Republic, to Gabon, to the Congo. What Carlson, and I would be absolutely happy to hear him elaborate on this, what he didn't talk about was the dream that animated most people, both from Anglophone Cameroon and Francophone Cameroon, during those years, between the partition and the 60s, the dream of rebuilding some kind of unity, the dream of reunification, which precedes the independent government in Yaoundé in 1960, which was, for instance, with the UPC at the heart of Cameroon nationalism, which was also present in the KNDP, which in so-called Anglophone Cameroon took the form of a refusal to be appended onto Nigeria. That the specter of Nigeria triggered in so-called Anglophone Cameroon rejuvenated that dream that was shared by people on both sides of the Mungo. So do we just, let's say, how is it that we interpret that attempt by Cameroonians at taking over an invention of somebody else and making it theirs? So I won't go much more onto those historical questions, but I think that they are absolutely key to the current discussion. As far as I can see it, the question in Cameroon, as well as in some other countries, is about a radical decolonization. How is it that we take charge of these things that were invented at our expense and properly and radically decolonize them? How is that we build in Cameroon an authentic Pan-African state that is multinational and multicultural? Or is it that this is something, or is it that it's too late? and that the only choice we have is secession. Personally, I don't know. But what I know is that historically, it doesn't matter what the option is, each option has a price. So the question we have to ask is, what is that price? Are we willing to pay it? But very clearly, the status quo is, it cannot stand. It cannot stand for all kinds of reasons. For the reason that our compatriots of so-called Anglophone Cameroon have been treated as second-class citizens in every sector of national public life. So the status quo is not tenable. Personally, I don't believe in secession. I believe in Pan-Africanism. I believe that we have too many microstates, we have too many boundaries, that for Africa to become its own center and its own power, it needs to become a vast space of circulation. We have to decommission gradually colonial boundaries. And frankly, as an individual, I don't know whether I'm Francophone. I'm not Francophone. I'm not French. I'm not Francophone. And I really resent the idea of labeling me a Francophone. Nor am I an Anglophone. I'm an African. And it is from that basis that it seems to me we have to invent new forms of political community in which everyone has a stake. As far as Cameroon is concerned, this has to undergo, it has to translate into a return to federalism. Of course we have to go towards federalism. We have to make sure that a national state that has become a threat to local communities ceases to be so. Because for the time being, the state in Cameroon is a threat to the southern western province and the northwest province. So how is it that we turn it into a state that is no longer a threat? Federation is one way of doing it. So that is what I think. But one last point, you see what, I mean, English is not really my language, no it's French. But English doesn't belong only to our brothers and sisters in Northwest and Southwest. I mean, the people who thought about unification, people like Bernard Fonlon and the others, that is not how they understood it. The way they understood it, the theoreticians of the federal state of Cameroon understood those languages as belonging to us all. That's how they understood bilingualism. Now, all that I'm talking about, is it possible with the kind of regime we have in Yaoundé? I really don't believe so. So it might be that we are cornered unless somewhat we engineer our political imagination and we mobilize as people have been mobilizing in northwestern and southwestern Cameroon, and that's how most struggles have been won. Those are my introductory comments.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. From a historical perspective, through a philosophical perspective, I am going to try and talk from an activist perspective. Why am I involved in this? And the way I perceive this whole debacle taking place in Cameroon as it is. Let me start first of all by saying, and I've heard a lot of the arguments, and I think Professor Anyangwe made mention of it when he talked about what this issue is not. And I've heard a few people talk about their right to defend their culture, an Anglo-Saxon culture, and I go in the same light. I see myself as an African. I am not Anglo-Saxon, and I am not defending an Anglo-Saxon tradition, or like Professor Mbembe said, or even a French culture. That is what it is not. What it is, in my opinion, is a systematic eradication of a people And I think this has been elaborately discussed in various sectors. A very good example is what the President of the National Assembly of Cameroon said when he responded to the grievances of English-speaking Cameroons or Cameroonians. And he responded that they are nothing but 2 cubes of sugar in a bowl of water. What that means simply is that over time we expect you to melt. And this is the heart of the problem. Now, from an activist perspective, and I say this, activist, but also I think it's generational. For a lot of people, my generation, who were not there when these things happened in 1961, were not yet born in 1972, we are learning a lot. We've learned a lot. We continue to learn a lot. And I think over the past 6 months, for me personally, it has been a roller coaster lesson. I joined a number of chat groups about 15 years ago, just following what was happening, the Amazonia group, the SCNC, and over a period, I realized, for me, I thought this was a bunch of lunatics. I don't understand what they're talking about. And I disengaged until this crisis resurfaced. And then I learned a lot of things. And one of the things that I learned was that all along, I have spent my entire life thinking I was part of a country. I was part of something that we could build in spite of its weaknesses. And then I just realized that I was part of a project, that all along I was I was a pawn on a chessboard, which somebody remotely was moving here and there. And I think generally most of us have been that way. And then you'll ask, and this is why for me, every time I hear people talk about this, and it is limited to the 2 Cameroons, the French-speaking Cameroon and the English-speaking Cameroon, it worries me because we are not looking at this issue from more macro perspective, which says, in fact, both Cameroons are pawns in a bigger political game. And that is important to understand. Now, what do I mean by this and being part of a project? When you go back to what they call the Accord de Coopération between France and Cameroon at independence, and not only Cameroon, but 15 or 16 other French-speaking countries, some 55, 56 years ago, which basically surrendered every right they had as nations, as a country, to France. Then it begins to make sense why I think most of us, are part of a project. Our curriculum at school was designed in France. And it is no accident that on the one part of the country, the history that we are taught, he made mention of UPC and all the nationalist movements. These movements were nationalists. They were fighting for the true independence of Cameroon. They never won. And there is a certain kind of history that's taught to a particular group of Cameroonians. And then on the other hand, I am a Cameroonian who grew up in a country where I can recount to you English history from 1603 to this day. I can recount to you French history from the days of Charlemagne to this day. And I've got no clue what happened 55 years ago. I am only beginning to learn now. We are part of a project. And for me, that is where we need to start. Where is the origin and where is the root? Unless we go to the root, we will continue to play around the leaves and wasting our time. Now, like I said, I disengaged from this whole thing, and then I learned that a lot of things had happened which we didn't know in terms of the kind of education that we were given. And that's why it continues to embarrass me that after 55 years, we are talking about a problem from a linguistic perspective that says the one is Francophone, the other is Anglophone, and that this is basically a Francophone-Anglophone thing. And I'm going to get into the heart of the problem and why, for me, it became easy to pick sides, to choose sides. Now, is this a secessionist crisis? I have come to the point where I tend to disagree, and I say it's a restorationist project. A very simple restorationist project that says, in 1961, 2 countries came together, they had an agreement on the basis of mutual respect and mutual partnership and equality. Now, over the past 55 years, the relationship is not the same anymore. For us to fix the problem, we need to go back to where the understanding and the agreement was reached. Otherwise, we'll be wasting our time. And it is based on that I think the current crisis in Cameroon today is a blessing in lots of ways. It's a pity that is happening in only one part, one part of the country, but it is also happening in one part of the country because that part happens to be a country. It is a nation that went into a relationship based on an independence that it gained in 1961. Now, what has happened over the past 55 years, like I mentioned, is the systematic eradication of a people. What do I mean by that? When you look at the, and I think they both have mentioned it, that the relationship is not the same anymore. If you, a simple arithmetic is that in a population of 23 million, 20% happen to come from southern Cameroons, and out of the 20%, when they do recruitment, take the military for instance, you do recruitment of 1,000 young people into the military, 6 of them come from this zone. You're basically systematically eradicating the potential of these people to have an army or to have a say in the army. So it is no coincidence. It is part of a well-thought plan. So I'm talking about this from an educational perspective, how we have been educated and how we function today as a people. A couple of months ago, I was on the radio talking about this, and a young man called, said he was a lawyer. He was a common law lawyer. By implication, he understands common law, which is the legal system that was inherited from the British. And he thought that my argument was flawed because there is no way I could argue from that perspective or argue at all, because the only way I could make such an argument is because I'm being influenced by foreign forces. By implication, I do not have the capacity to reflect and think as an individual and as somebody who can present an argument logically. But it came as no surprise. The young man is a product of a system. Me too. The only difference is that over time, I have learned to liberate myself from that system. The problem we are having generally is that the cross-section of our population continues to be victims. They continue to bear the yoke of this system that they were born into, that they've been educated into, and they continue to thrive in. And that is why we today, corruption for instance, you may know that over the past couple of decades, Cameroon has been voted the champion of the world for corruption twice. And this is being seen as a normal thing. An American company, Heracles, bought 73,000 hectares, was in the process of purchasing 73,000 hectares of land from the Cameroonian government. Now 73,000 hectares, if you put it together arithmetically, is approximately 5 of the smallest countries in Europe put together. And the gentleman who was in the process of doing this transaction, who carried out what they call the environmental impact assessment, happened to come to South Africa for medical treatment. And we had a lengthy conversation. And he told me that we need to accept that the system is what it is. There is nothing we can do about it. In fact, he argues that we should institute a system of corruption as part of the education that we receive. Now, this is normal. It's become so normal and so banalized to the point where people don't see anything wrong with it. Now, going back to the subject that we are having, the question is, what is the Anglophone problem and why is it all of a sudden such a crisis? It is a crisis for the simple reason that a group of people, a nation, a country, and the people who constitute that country feel that after 55 years of a relationship, the relationship is not going the way they would have felt. They would have liked to see it happen. As a result, they want to disengage. A disengagement, in this case, in my opinion, is not cessation, because cessation is a case where you have a complete country and where you have a group of people in that country wanting to break away. Now, that's a cessation. We're talking about the restoration of a country that was. That is very important to note. Now, is this a crisis? And like I mentioned, it is a crisis, but it is a crisis which, in my opinion, offers opportunities for a couple of reasons. Number one, many would tell you that Cameroon constitutes the pillar on which the France-Afrique was built. France-Afrique is the relationship that France has with these 15, 16 countries across the continent where everything these countries have belongs to France. If you find diamond, before you can explore or exploit the diamond, you must first of all consult France to find out if you have the right to touch it or not. And if you're the president, before you can do a reshuffle of your cabinet, you have to consult Paris and find out if this individual can be put into your government or not. And if you don't, you get punished. Now, the pillar and this whole concept, which in lots of ways was borrowed and inherited from the Nazist government of Hitler, is what the French then took into Africa. And I say this is an opportunity, because if we are able to shake the foundation of this edifice that France has created on the continent, it gives an opportunity for the French hegemony in Africa to be broken. A lot of my friends and compatriots and brothers on the other side of the Mungo, east of the Mungo, have said, no, but this fight is wrong. We are one. Why are you doing, your approach is wrong. And I'm like, you need to think. Instead of investing your energy and fighting against my fight, why don't you invest your energy and fight against the common enemy? By so doing, we will both win. But the moment you're looking at my fight and saying, no, you shouldn't fight for yourself alone, fight for all of us, you're fighting the wrong person. And I think that is where, in terms of perspective, some of our compatriots are getting it wrong. Once you understand that there is a common enemy, and the potential, the fact that Southern Cameroons can disengage, can unshackle itself from this yoke of French hegemony in Africa, we are potentially unleashing that tsunami that would bring down French hegemony. Then we are beginning to find a solution, and therein an opportunity. And my argument to the rest of Africa, not only to French-speaking Africa, but to the rest of Africa, is that Africa happens to be the second biggest continent in the world. It's got a fairly youthful population. It's got 70% of untapped arable land in the world, 70% of the world's untouched arable land sitting there and unexploited. Now we're beginning to have a whole series of issues as a continent, including land grabbing. Now, what this presents in itself for the African continent is that, being the continent the least developed, about 2-3% of the world's GDP, this presents an opportunity for the African continent to move forward. How? Because once you are able to liberate these 16 countries across the continent, which have been enslaved by a system from which they are finding it difficult to unshackle themselves, then automatically economic growth in Africa will come to light. So this issue of Southern Cameroon should not be seen as a simple problem of Anglophone issue in Cameroon. We should see it as potentially an issue that could liberate the African continent as a whole. Now, Fritz, I know you said 15 minutes, but you also wanted me to talk a bit to me convening the...
Well, you have time to do that later in
Thanks,
the discussion.
Ben. Okay, so now in conclusion, I would like to say very simply that the crisis in Southern Cameroon constitute a number of things. Number one, we are talking about the restoration of the independence of a country that was. Two, we are talking about potentially an opportunity for the African continent to liberate itself. And it is important, therefore, that everybody sees this from the opportunity that presents, not so much from the crisis which we think is. Thank you.
I would like to start by thanking my co-panelists for what they've said so far. I want to dive or plunge into the historical background that has already been given. But is there really an Anglophone problem? That is the question that many back home, especially our political elite, from the Anglophone section of Cameroon, have actually asked. What is today termed the Anglophone crisis actually started as corporate revendications. The Anglophone lawyers on one hand and the Anglophone teachers union on the other hand. But along the line, what actually happened is these revendications actually took a political twist. Due to what? Due to government intransigences and actually dealing with the crisis. However, according to one of our former governors, of both regions, of what I mean of the Anglophone and of both Anglophone regions. He summarized the Anglophone crisis into 6 points. These 6 points, according to him, starts with a criticism of what he terms a centralized system of the state. Secondly, the transfer of the decision-making body to Yaoundé, far from the population and their problems. Thirdly, a failure to respect commitments to equitably take into account the institutional, legal, and administrative cultures and traditions inherited from our former colonial masters. Fourthly, a non-compliance with the solemn promises that were made during the referendum campaign. Fifthly, a change of the name of the state, replacement of the United Republic of Cameroon to what is today termed La République or the Republic of Cameroon. And finally, the non-respect of bilingualism in the public sectors as stipulated by our constitution, that is French and English. But what I've actually come to notice is the fact that many streams have actually come up. We have the secessionist stream. We have those that think that federalism is the ideal form. And those that don't even want to talk about it. And what you will pick up is secession and federalism. When the crisis started, being an Anglophone, when you did bring it up, it was uncalled for. It became a taboo question. Now, what my worry is, those that claim secession, what is their agenda? What is actually their agenda? And to another extent, the lukewarm attitude of the international community and multinationals actually baffles me. This is generally the case when you look at conflict in Africa. The international community and multinationals will definitely wait when there's already a carnage that is already taking place. That is when they start coming in. But then it goes back to how do we handle, or how can we prevent these issues or crises before they actually break out. Moreover, I actually think no state can live or can function in isolation. For it to actually function properly, taking into consideration globalization, be it at what level, when crises like this do occur, for it to be solved, both external factors, internal factors, and those that play in the background, hiddenly, have to take path. I wouldn't talk much. I will leave the debate to be opened for further discussions to continue. Thank you.
So thank you very much to our panelists for your insightful input. I think what has come out from your intervention so far, there seems to be a consensus that the problem we are dealing with here has its roots in the colonial era. And we are dealing with a problem that is larger than even what we are seeing in Cameroon, that cuts across the entire continent. But what is striking again is that despite this seeming understanding among everyone, we seem to have a differing perspective on how to proceed. In this regard, I want to throw 3 questions to each of you to respond to before we can open to the audience. Let me start with Professor Mbembe. I know you've indicated that history itself, the truth about history is not something that we should take for granted. But I just want you to quickly tell us if you do agree with the rendition of history that was given by Professor Anyangwe. Quickly.
Yes, to a large extent, I follow him. It doesn't mean that, yes, I follow him. It doesn't mean that, I was also trained as an historian. And in fact, I did some research on this matter. So I follow Carlson to a large extent. I was soliciting from him his views on the powerful trend in Cameroon. I hesitate to even use the word because it has become a matter of contestation itself. So we don't even know what the name of these entities are any longer. So a long political tradition of coming together, epitomized by the demand for reunification, the return to the territorial integrity of that German invention, because it was that which brought us here. If we had not developed the concept of reunification, we wouldn't even be here. The British, in fact, wanted to administer their part of the territory. They found it burdensome. When you look at the historical documents, the British were keen to not spend anything in the colonies, but take all the profits. So when they were given that part of the country, they found it burdensome, and they started administering it from Nigeria as a low-cost form of domination. So without the concept of reunification, we wouldn't even be here. Everybody would be wherever he or she wanted to be. So I want Carlson to help us to elucidate that dimension, historical dimension, without which we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, indeed, thank you very much, Achille. I think Achille earlier, there were 3 issues he wanted me to talk on. Let me start with this one about quote-unquote reunification. The term reunification itself is used quite often coming from French Cameroon. This was a UPC project. He mentioned the KNDP. The KNDP only came into existence in 1959. But in 1953, the people of the Southern Cameroon, through their 13 elected representatives in Enugu, Nigeria, had declared benevolent neutrality in Nigerian politics and made it very clear that they were not part of Nigeria. They moved out of Nigeria. There was no problem. And Nigeria saw no problem with that, even though we had been administered by the British for over 30 years. And yet, we moved out from there peacefully, no problem. In 1953 and 1954, we established a government in Boya, led by Ndele with CPNC. There was no care there. It was CPNC. Now, as the next round of election was coming, which was in 59, Foncha decided to form a party called the KNDP and introduce that concept of unification. Now, you will discover when you read the literature coming even from French Cameroon, sometimes they talk of unification. Sometimes they talk of reunification, which means they are not even sure to say what they are talking about. But there's a semantic difference between those two terms, unification and reunification. You cannot reunify something that was never united before. And if you talk about unification, two entities that had never had any connection whatsoever can decide to unify. So, because the UPC was a political party in French Cameroon that was fighting, a radical political party that decided to do guerrilla warfare to win independence for French Cameroon, called Union de Population de Cameroun. That was unknown, like one of the participants has been saying, Milan was saying, that was history on that other side. We never learned all of that thing in the history in the British Cameroon. But because of the repressive and oppressive system in French Cameroon, the UPC people, many of them, they escaped and came over to British Cameroon. But because of our value system, we said, we are not going to stop anybody fleeing from oppression. And as soon as you stepped foot in authority, you became a free person. I allowed you to carry on your politics, whatever. That was never any problem. And the UPC then migrated and came to British Cameroon, introduced this concept of unification or reunification. We have named people who today they are being called with Trojan horses for that. And were able to finance Foncha, KNDP, for Foncha to accept that concept of reunification or unification, whatever it is. Now, in the whole of the British Cameroon, there was no such concept. Because if that were true, Northern Cameroon would not have stayed in Nigeria. Would have been back in this place. There has never been any idea, any concept of the people of the former German Cameroons reconstituting German Cameroon. Because if that were the case, the Doc B would not have gone today to, that has gone today to the Central African Republic, the past which Achille himself mentioned, to Gabon, Central African Republic, to Congo. Those people have been clamoring, no, want to reconstitute the Cameroon. There was no such thing. We must distinguish situations of political maneuvering to attain a certain objective, and from what comes from people's heart as their conviction. I will suggest that there was never any such conviction, either on the part of the people in French Cameroon or English Cameroon, to reconstitute German Cameroon. It was simply part of political maneuvering for certain ends. As proof of that, during the plebiscite in 1961, at one point, Ndele himself started using the language of unification with French Cameroon. But midstream decided to change and said, no, with Nigeria. And the unification or reunification discourse is more appropriate with going to Nigeria than even going to French Cameroon. Because, ladies and gentlemen, as far as English Cameroon was concerned, the French Cameroon was terra incognita. We didn't know any such thing about those people. We heard funny stories about people being killed or massacred and so on, heads being cut off and put on roadside to deter people from rebelling against the French. That was news to us. We just heard these things. But we had been with Nigeria for a long time. We had the same constitutional arrangement. We had the same political arrangement. We sat in the same parliament with them, either in Enugu or in Lagos. We had social intercourse with them, political connection with them, economic connection with them. No such thing ever happened on the other side of the side. If you ask, there is not one single or community of us or people of the British Cameroons who went to settle anywhere in French Cameroon. It never happened. So one must therefore distinguish this whole question of maneuvering to attain a certain political objective. We know that the KNDP, the only reason why the KNDP was using the word reunification was to distinguish itself from Ndele, who wanted us to go back to Nigeria, which would have been actually reunification with Nigeria, if one were so minded to use really terms in their dictionary meaning. But that never happened. So that's the first thing. The second thing I just want to react to is when Achille says he is not so much comfortable with small states and the continent of Africa and so on. I agree with you. I'll be the happiest person if we can dissolve all the states in Africa and all be one and we'll set a continental government. I don't know where we'll be sitting. I'll be the first person very happy with that. Unfortunately, that is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen in 1,000 years. First point. The second point is the Southern Cameroons cannot by any stretch of imagination be described as a mini or Lilliputian state. The concept of mini state or Lilliputian state had never been defined by anybody, not even by international law. And in any event, the Southern Cameroons is bigger in size and in population than 56 UN member states. So the idea that perhaps the Southern Cameroons is small, therefore is not deserving of asserting itself, self-determination, I think perhaps is incorrect. Because the question of size and population is relative. French Cameroon in relation to Nigeria is a mini state, it's a small state. In relation to Algeria, it's a small state. In relation to Sudan, it's a small state. So where are you going to end up with smallness and bigness? I would therefore suggest that any people who qualify as a people within the definition of international law and have a right to self-determination are entitled to assert that right to self-determination, even if they are just as small as the Vatican City. The other point I just want to react to is people always come, I've heard that thing about secession. I think we should be much more circumspect when we use that term. I know for people who perhaps have not given it a serious thought, they use it in a loose way. But we must be very, very careful. To begin with, there is no rule of international law which says, assuming even there's secession, we say there shouldn't be secession. If that were so, Sudan would not have been. If that were so, Algeria would not have been a state today, because you remember the French kept on saying, l'Algérie est française. So there is no question of secession here. When two states decide to come together, two countries decide to come together, there's an entry. And the right to entry necessarily implies a right of exit. And one therefore cannot talk of secession in that context. But if one part of French Cameroon decides today to want to go off, yes. Because at the time French Cameroon achieved independence, that part was part of French Cameroon. But French Cameroon achieved independence on 1st of January 1960. We were not even there. We were not even involved in the parliament. We were not involved. In fact, we didn't even know what they are, who they are. So one cannot say with any argument convincingly that there is a case of secession here. There is none whatsoever. So with that, I just say thank you very much.
Can we just give Professor to respond to before we go to ask a question to Milan?
I'm sure you. I mean, I'm not. What is his name? The Minister of Information. I'm not a representative of Issa Chiroma. Our chemical ally in those parts of the world. I mean, the historical debate is in itself absolutely fascinating. And I just want to make two very brief remarks. First of all, the history of the social formations that occupy that part of our continent, the history is not simply colonial. Colonialism in the long history of those societies is a parenthesis. So, to imagine, to invent a nation on the basis of colonialism alone seems to me to be amputating those societies and those cultures of what is probably the most important, powerful part of themselves. From a cultural point of view, there's hardly any distinction between the people who live in Mbuda and those who live in Santa. And in fact, what most historians have established, the work of Varnier is the best on pre-colonial societies in that part of our continent, shows that there have been always continuities, long continuities, alliances, exchange of religious and cultural symbols. So I don't understand this urge we Africans have to limit our history to the colonial interruption. What is it that we do with what preceded colonialism? That's the first objection, which doesn't mean that, if our brothers and sisters in that part of Cameroon want to go it alone, I'm not, my opinion is totally inconsequential when it comes to that. I can have an opinion as a Cameroonian, but it has no impact whatsoever on, that is their decision. But if we want to talk in terms of historiography, then we have to bring on board more factors than just colonialism. And if we are serious, when we bring that deep history, of course it will muddle somewhat the waters. I don't really, Carlson, I don't believe in the fact that they didn't know about those people. Of course they did. Of course, from Bamenda to Bafoussam, from Buea, Tico, and Douala. Of course they were trafficked long before colonialism, during colonialism. So we don't need to excise that part, including when we want to argue for a nation. In fact, our concept of the nation will be even stronger if we bring that on board and if we do not try to erase it. So that would be my objection to just the intellectual aspect of Carlson's comments. The political ones, I am not in favor of our Anglophone, so-called Anglophone brothers and sisters living. I still believe that. I believe in what you were saying. I think that is the issue. The issue is de-Francophonizing the country, both in northern and southern Cameroon and in so-called Francophone Cameroon. Because when you say 1,000 people recruited in the army, and you say, I can't remember the exact, six, do you know how many Beti people are recruited?
60%.
How many Bassa people are recruited? Almost none. So the issue, I agree with you that there's corruption. The real issue is not for Africans to be killing each other in the name of some foreign imposition. If we are to kill each other, let's kill each other on the basis of our own reasons. I hope that we won't kill each other. But if that has to happen, let it not be by delegation, but it shouldn't be that. So the real issue is, in that part of the continent, how is it that we bring to an end French hegemony? How do we de-Francophonize our society, our public institutions, our culture? We can do that through an expanded federalism, which recognizes the specificity of the so-called Anglophone problem, but a federalism that is extended to the Francophones. We can do that, but for it to happen, we have to mobilize differently. We have to propose to our people a different political imagination, which is not premised on who differs from whom, since when, that politics of identity, which always ends up somewhere in that. But in our old African traditions of multiplicity, of multiple affiliations that we belong, there are many different possibilities of belonging which are at our disposal. This is what we have pushed aside in favor of Jacobinism, which the French themselves have abandoned. So how is it that as Africans we keep mimicking things which have been imposed on us, and which those who impose them on us have abandoned. But we keep going on with them. So it seems to me that that is the possibility intellectuals have to put on the table. And social mobilizations can cohere around that so that we keep building the continent and not dividing, subdivision, classification, and ultimately confrontation. That is my dream, but it might be a pipe dream, as Carson said.
Just 1 minute, let me just respond to that. Please, moderator, just one. Yes.
This battery there.
Oh,
So you can talk without.
Is it batteries up? Okay.
Just quickly, so
yeah.
that we can open our...
Let me just say this. Ashil talks about Bamenda, Bunda people and so on. I admire his courage about reconfiguring Africa and do everything. Unfortunately, African state as we find today is based on territorially founded, grounded treaties. The Cameroon has its boundaries well cut out by treaty. The Southern Cameroon has its boundaries well cut out by treaty. So does South Africa. So does Namibia. So does Nigeria. Every single African country. The project which Ashil is talking about is a mammoth project if we want to dismantle or do all of that. I'm not saying it's an impossibility. Perhaps we can start that one by dismantling all the frontiers we have stated by international law. But to the extent that these frontiers still exist, those treaties still exist, and African countries are claiming independence, and international law says the territories, the boundaries of your independent country become frozen on the day of achievement of independence. So long as then we start interfering with each other's business. Then the whole concept of protecting us, this thing becomes redundant. So I'm suggesting that so long as we have states grounded in international law, and we have boundaries of states grounded in treaties, territorial grounded treaties, there's very little one can do about it, and one must acknowledge the fact. And having acknowledged that fact, we can then sit that on a round table and say, we are all Africans, we are doing all the French, we are doing all the English, we are doing all the Portuguese, and so on and so forth. Let's erect some African language. I'm not sure which one that will be. Whether that will not be a new form of colonialism now, where we're imposing some other people, I'm not too sure. But that will be something we can discuss on a round table, and we'll do away with our boundaries, and then we'll say, well, that is it, a new Africa and their kingdom come. But not yet, no country.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we now open for questions from the audience. We will have them in rounds of threes. Do we have a roving mic? Let's start with Balusi over there.
I'd like to thank you, moderator. Chogoza, I'd like to thank you very much, and to the speakers, thank you very much. And without disagreeing with others or being disfavorable to others, I would like to, I would more align myself with the two in the middle here. I think any kind of contestation begins in the mind and in the spirit. And I think what the professor is proposing, we must have an eternal spirit. But at the same time, I don't think he's saying there's no steps we take. I think he's saying that. But we must have a vision, a spirit that guides us where we're going, either than us being embedded in what the French and in what the Americans and the British are doing to us, because that's what is practically happening. And we see the power of money. Why other people go and form that part of money and all that? Because they know the power of money works. But I want to begin by saying what I wanted to ask, and what I'm not hearing is, like when we fought in South Africa here, after talking about 12 months, those who preceded us, we saw that the armed struggle was critically important. And not that we're going to have a war of total vanquishment. The armed struggle was waged in order to politicize the people. And we knew it wouldn't take 2 years, 3 years and all that. It became part of a cultural process to politicize, to force them to the table, to unmask those who were behind, the Anglo-Americans, the MI6, the CIA and all that, because we started forcing them, you're going to make the money, but you know what? Your wives are not going to push their prems to the park and eat. because we started bombing everywhere. So I'm not hearing that. And when that happens...
You're not hearing what?
No, they understood what I said. I'm not hearing that. Not to kill for the sake of killing. Because part of the French society, the American society, it's heavily embedded on Africa. And they are not going to move. Even when you start shooting, even intelligently, they are also going to move their chests very intelligently. It's not going to take maybe 20 years. But I'm not hearing you speaking about an armed struggle. You are going to be frustrated. I'll give you an example. Here, we had APLA, we had MK. In Zimbabwe, there was ZIPRA, there was ZANLA. Even in Mozambique, Frelimo broke into us. Yeah. But there must be an intelligentsia that pushes that. You're not just going to be taking our products. They are going to be spilled in blood. I'm not hearing that. I'm just hearing intellectual.
Thank you.
Are you going to prod the French? Are you going to prod? Because when they see you coming, I see French people sending their armies into your countries, sending their army. What are you doing in return? Do you have ground forces that little by little are building on that? I think.
Can we take another question?
Answer, please.
Thanks. Okay, let's just have this question before we move the mic to the other side. Can you speak a little bit louder, sir?
Okay. I come from Channel Africa, and I produce a program that's Spotlight Africa, that deals with Africa. Now, what we really see here is that what's been spoken here, basically, these are problems of Africa. These are African problems. There's no African country that does not suffer from this problem. But they're only accentuated now because they're two different entities.
Yes.
Now, to put the whole thing in a proper perspective, we look at African so-called countries or states or whatever it is. Basically, African states are colonial states. They come from a colonial state. And a colonial state was just territorial demarcation. Yeah? And then there was a colonial power which came and put in a state. And that state was a colonial state, the army, the force, and people were forced to live by it. Yeah? Unlike people like the Chinese, Vietnamese, the Chinese, they're the oldest nation in the world. Yeah? From that nation formed a state to look up to that nation. European nations are not the oldest nations. You know? Now, we find that with independence, the nationalists, they actually inherited the colonial state. The nation was not there, and they had a problem of actually putting the nation together. And so you find the governments that came out after independence. They were very cohesive in the sense that they wanted to maintain the nation. Yeah? And in the end, they had a nation state. When you talk of a nation state, it's a nation that's formulated by the state. From there, we've got when you talk about the nation now, I talked about the Chinese. Now, in a nation, amongst the people, the population, there is an idea of nationhood, which is lacking in Africa, and that's the thing that you have to fight for. That is the biggest African fight, the fight for nationhood. You find that people like Nyerere actually had to struggle, and they to actually first form the nation, the concept of a nation. It is avoiding, that thing is not coming up in Uganda, where everything is based upon the ethnicity and the ultranationalists. Yeah, everybody's own tribe. Yeah, it failed in coming out to this whole thing about unition. There's a second thing. Yeah, it failed in Sudan. Yeah, the configuration of the independent Sudan, it did not put in the Southerners. The Southerners protested when they were there. The Southerners were more interested in actually uniting with East Africa. And so the long war, this law in Sudan started before independence. Yeah, we can go and talk about many other places, but the best place is where my friend comes from. Somaliland, the Somalians. The Somalians think that they had a nation state of the same people, same language, same everything, but it failed. But now what we are talking about is actually talking about marginalization of a people, and that is because of elites taking over power. And it's been discussed, but it's not been properly pointed out. Yeah, there are political elites who come out and take over power, and they concentrate the power in themselves with the help of the former of capital, as they say nowadays. I do not know what they know about capital of the imperialists. And that is the very big problem, that we've got a problem first of actually coming in with nationhood. But I think the struggle is long, and the struggle is not that we've got to take up arms like South Africa to fight the French. Because before then, you've got to give the people a common identity. That is the biggest problem. Then we'll go fight the French. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. There is another hand there. Can we try to be brief in our interventions?
I have actually listened with much interest the debate from all the panelists. Yeah, it seems to me Prof. Anyangwe starts his debate from a certain place at history, where the Germans, I think before Germans or within the German period, post-German. And Prof. Achille tries to take us to pre-colonial Cameroon. Yeah, and ask questions about what was Cameroon then or stuff. And Mr. Milan takes us to a kind of balanced situation. He talks about the activities, what is ongoing, what is happening in the scene like now, and takes us to the role of the colonialists as well, which Prof. Achille tries to bring. I actually like the suggestion from the vision part. I see the vision missing in the 6 questions that this last speaker also mentioned. I see the vision of Cameroonian missing. What I pick up, my question is going to come in the form of a suggestion. What I pick up is Prof. Anyangwe keeps talking about they, and referring to the international bodies as well, like yeah. So I'm wondering, who are they and who are we? If I'm to be part of that we, I'm also wondering whose agenda are we pushing as Cameroonians? If we keep going and talking about, I would like to situate myself somewhere in the Cameroon. Okay, in the people. Let me not call it Cameroon because Cameroon was also brought by the Portuguese. We were like, we didn't hear that on the stage. We were like explorers, not politicians or whatever. Yeah, before then, what were we? Was there still Anglophone and was there still Francophone? Why do we pick to start post-German or pre-something? Why can't we go back then, there, to find ourselves as Cameroonians? What I'm trying to go to, or where I'm trying to land, is... again, the problem of agenda setting. We see new allies are rising. They are putting, there is something that they have to fetch. There is a resource. But you, us, we have to fight while they explore and the masters gain. Whose agenda are we pushing if we keep talking about Anglophone? You, me, us, they. Thank you.
Can I ask? I already have the mic. Thank you very much. Thanks, panelists. I mean, I'm just going to add to what you've said, and we looked at it from different perspectives. From a historical perspective, I'll be very, very brief. Historical, cultural, and other. Like, I just want to look at it from a lived experience perspective. I mean, growing up in the southern part of Cameroon as a young man, I actually got exposure to the history and the sort of the construction of the economic levers and political levers of southern Cameroon. And it became very clear to me that as a people and almost as a nation, he spoke about nation, there is a project to discriminate, marginalize, and almost exterminate that group of people. So my consciousness actually arose from there. My question is actually to Prof. Mbembe. You said you are not influential. I think you are. And as a consummate intellectual, you've spoken about different options that should be put on the table. My question to you is, what have you done so far, and what are you planning to do going forward to help to conscientize or put those proposals on the table to bring the other side of the current Cameroon, which is the French-speaking Cameroon, to that level of consciousness? Because I think you have a very influential role to play. What is your plan? Thanks.
Is there another question?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can speak without a mic. I'm very concerned that I'm very concerned that in the presentations that we have, there was a sort of like a
a tendency of avoiding to tell us how is the national cake is being distributed. You didn't tell us how the resources are distributed in Cameroon, because I feel like it could be a major contestation. Please allude to us how the cake is being distributed in Cameroon.
Okay. Let's just go back to the panelists before we open for another round. And can we be brief, responses?
Okay. Now I'll just respond to just two. My friend there and the lady. Okay, colleagues. Yeah. Nothing has been said about armed struggle. I think you answered the question by saying there needs to be a process of conscientization first. And once that has been reached, yes.
Struggle, you conscientize at the same time.
Yes. Yes. Through armed struggle, you conscientize the people. Yes. I think what has happened is the response to what was billed as a civil disobedience with no use of no arms and a peaceful protest. But the response by the Yaoundé regime, by using the military to rape, kill, abduct, disappear, and plunder, has hardened people's mind. Something we started before in October as something was peaceful, by January has hardened as a result of the military response by the regime. But of course, the Yaoundé military has never been trained as a proper military to fight a foreign army. It has all been trained, right from the days of the French, for internal repression purposes. That is a basic problem. And so when they go out, even if you have a strike, they instinctively use firepower, using live bullets, which they did. And that has hardened people. And as this process goes on, the kind of thing you are talking about, I have no doubt, is going to get, that will be the result, the end result. Radicalization. Yes. Secondly, yes. You haven't seen why.
Can I clap hands to that?
Permission. Why are we not going back to pre-colonial Africa and dig up something from which, unfortunately, we are talking today of states. And by definition, you're talking about territories, a country that has defined borders, it has a population, it has a government. You can't claim yourself a state if you don't have defined borders. And those borders, unfortunately, were not defined by us, were defined by the colonial authorities. Until we do all of that, we'll have to leave what we have until that moment is reached. Thank you.
Prof, that is my exact problem. Why do we keep holding on to what is not ours? How does our true identity come up when we keep holding on to what is not truly ours? Because in your expose, you mentioned something about, okay, if we deny being Anglophone, Francophone, and start to talk about Africanness, along the line we start to try to diminish the number of languages we have, which is also diminishing ourselves, who we are. Do we necessarily have to reduce our languages because we have to fit into a nationally or nation state that was brought into our territory? That is not Africa. Africa is by nature multilingual. We can be all, we cannot be French, we cannot be English, Portuguese, Santa,
Spanish or whatever.
Yeah, we can't.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. That is the ideal. But for now, you have to live with the fact that international law imposes your existence when you carry a passport in your hand and you qualify yourself as X, this, and so on. That is a state, and that state has boundaries carved by colonial authorities. When we're all settled within our state and happy within the state which we are, then we can start this big debate. We go down to the AU in Addis Ababa and discuss how we're going to construct all our boundaries and create a unified Africa. Thank you.
Let's hear from Professor Mbembe.
Talk about armed struggle.
I agree with what you said. I mean, look, they sent the military, not even the military, specialized units in the military. They rape students, they break everything, they capture people, take them to Yaoundé, pretend to judge them in a court where everything is in French. It's all comedy, it's tragicomic. But that's the regime we live under. And it didn't start yesterday. it started with the very beginning of the regime. At its origins is an equal distribution of violence with a military that is trained to foment and entertain permanent civil war as a way of deterring people from rebelling. And behind that is French money, French technologies, French technical assistance, all that you were talking, that hydraulic structure that has forced us to relinquish our rights to some foreign power. That is what is at stake. Now, I mean, you asked me a very concrete question. The part of what some of us are doing. I mean, first of all, they denied that there was an Anglophone problem.
That's right.
They said, no, there is no problem. What are you talking about? The first task, at least in the French-speaking part of the country, was to argue that there is a problem. There have been a problem for a very long time, and it's time to deal with it. That battle has already been won, as far as I can see. At least among intellectuals and popular opinion, there are very few now who deny that there's a problem. Now, what is the nature of the problem? Point, I mean, you raised, all of us try to, how do we define what is at stake? Is it too late to deal with it? If it's not too late, what is required to deal with it now? At a time when, I mean, because the other title fits of the talk is the future of Cameroon. At a time when the future of this entity is at stake, we shouldn't forget that up in the north, a deadly conflict has been going on with Boko Haram, which is not, I mean, a national terrorist organization, it's a regional terrorist organization. On the eastern part, Central African Republic has been for a very long time a cul-de-sac, where the authority residing in Bangui is anything but formal. Along the Gulf of Guinea, our big neighbor Nigeria, we know what's going on in the Niger Delta thing. So we are surrounded by zones of tensions, and frankly, I mean, if you ask me, I don't think we need to open a new front of tension. I think whenever we come to violence or armed violence, is always symptomatic of some moral failure somewhere. As a principle, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't resort to violence. But whenever we open the doors of violence, first of all, we cannot guarantee where it will lead us. Second, we do not have control over how we conduct it. Once again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. But if we decide to use it, how do we make sure who pays the price? And how do we distribute that price equally? So that it's not always the same poor who pay the price for that type of activity. These are ethical, deep ethical questions we cannot just dismiss. And for our politics to be based on something ethical, we have to adjudicate on such matters. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't or we should resort to it. I'm saying before we enter those kinds of discussions, we have to be clear about where they might lead, who pays the price, how ethical it is, for what project, so forth and so on.
Milan, if you don't mind, can you address the question that was asked about whose agenda is being propelled here?
The agenda. I'm going to talk to the agenda, but I thought I should also talk to a couple of issues very quickly, if you would permit. The pipe dream that Professor Anyangwe mentioned. I happen to be a believer in the pipe dream. I have been a Pan-Africanist all my life, but I'm also a believer in a Pan-Africanism that is just, that is built on justice. Once there is no justice, we need to fix it. And that is why I started by saying today I'm not going to engage in intellectual and academic discussions. I'm going to be very activist in my approach. Pan-Africanism is is something that I believe in, but it is important also that is built on justice. And that is why it is important that when we have this discussion on and around Southern Cameroon's agenda, we talk about what the clear issues are. He asked the question, I think somebody asked the question about the national cake. The reason why this relationship has not been fair and just and why we have this crisis today is because the share of the national cake has not been just. Yes. Now we are talking about a part of what is supposed to be a country that produces, and we are told, 60% or more of the nation's wealth from the oil, from the cocoa. Cameroon happens to be the 4th highest producer of cocoa in the world. We're talking about the timber. Now, this particular part of the country contributes all of this to the national wealth, and yet when you look at the distribution of the wealth, it's tragic. Now, based on that, there is, especially if it were, and like we've talked about incidentally, if it were a matter of saying we always had been part of a country and we're trying to break away because of these issues, then that's one thing. But when you are a country in yourself that came into a relationship and you are treated as such, you have got every right to want to move out of the relationship. And that is where we are going. Now, am I a believer in breaking up a country that could have been? I strongly feel that we can fix it. Is it too late? Agenda. I don't think it's too late. But for us to fix it, there are certain fundamentals that we are going to look into. When if we get to that point, we will no longer be talking about an army that is stationed in one part of the country and that can be unleashed on the people whenever it suits the whims and caprices of a few. We will have to have our own army. Very important. When we talk about some kind of fixing the problem, we'll have to talk about the currency. We'll have to talk about complete and total control of our resources. Does that mean that I'm arguing for having those resources for only one part? No, I am a believer in the share of the wealth, not only within the country, but saying, moving forward and from a Pan-Africanist perspective, if we have neighbors who do not have, then let's try and share. So talk about the agenda. And this comes now to the convening the conclave, which was asked before. Like I said, I used to deride and kind of ignore and neglect actors who have been advocating for fairness and for justice, like Professor Anyangwe and them. But then I realized, and for a long time you can sit on the side and criticize or you do something. And my perspective and a whole lot of us was that let's do something. And that is when we then decided that part of the problem has always been that we decry the situation, we talk and we complain, but we are very, very fragmented. So the idea of the conclave was to bring the people of Southern Cameroon together and say, let's start talking as one. That is what has happened. We have been able to organize 2 conclaves, and from those 2 conclaves, we've been able to put in place a structure, we've been able to put in place a strategy, we've been able to put in place some kind of a vision as to where we want to go. And that vision does not exclude the possibility of good neighborliness. However, for us to get to that point, which is what Malosi asked, we have also gotten to the point where we are exploring different options, because we also need to get to the point where one person or one actor understands that they do not hold the monopoly to violence. There you go. Thank you.
Yes, you can respond to any of the questions.
I think since the problem actually began, one will question what have been the steps that the government has taken to resolve the crisis. I'll look at it from 2 perspectives. You have a repressive regime on one hand, then taking into consideration that Cameroon is not isolated. We have foreign nationals, we have multinationals, we have the international community. It goes back then to the question of what I said earlier on, a lukewarm attitude or approach that has been taken by the international community to actually deal with the problem. For example, how would you understand the fact that the IMF or the World Bank, as in one of its interactions with the government, proposing solutions to the economic stalemate in the country, without mentioning the reinstatement of internet in the disputed regions, which is actually a vector of economic growth. Actually, that was baffling. Then, when you go further, you see statements that have been made by the Human Rights Commission of the African Union, and at the same time, there is a special representative from the UN. They are actually calling on the government for genuine dialogue, reinstate the internet, demilitarize the disputed regions, and release those that have been arbitrarily arrested. But then, you can't state this and you don't say, if you don't do this, then this is what is going to follow. But we are not told there are no sanctions. That is where I look at the lukewarm attitude of the international community. But then when I go back to the government, the government recently, the head of state traveled to Italy and he met members of the Italian government and at the same time the Pope. When he came back, actually, this I don't know. It's surprising. He started by he created a commission, to accelerate the promotion of bilingualism. But you can't create a commission of accelerating bilingualism, something that is already in the constitution. If it is already in the constitution that French and English are the major languages, why, if up till now, these languages are not applied in the public sector, why does it come to mind now that you have to create a commission? Of which this commission actually doesn't have the power, to actually sanction when this is not taken into consideration. Secondly, through the Minister of Justice, Laurent So, and Keeper of the Seals, there was a publication of he further said the publication of the English version of the Howada Treaty. That was one of the solutions that the government came up with. The creation of a common law section of the Supreme Court, which will hold its sessions in English in accordance with the common law and handle all cases from the courts of appeal. This is just a commission, but there is no text legally binding these commissions. Then finally, the creation of what? A common law section at the ENAM, that is the National School of the Army and the Magistracy, and the creation of the Department of English Law in the universities of Douala, Mariwa, but all this is just what? Talk. There is no legal document binding these commissions. It goes back to is the government really ready to actually solve the Anglophone problem?
Thank you so much. Before we open up for the last round of questions, I just want to throw one or two questions we receive from our compatriots across the world. And I want to start, I think there are two questions that go to Milan and Professor Anyangwe specifically. So when we're looking at a perspective for Southern Cameroon State, there is a question about how do you envisage handling what is considered to be the animosity between the Northwest and Southwest region? That is the first question. And another one is how do you envisage dealing with the concept of the 11th province that borders between the Francophone and the Anglophone section? So quickly, can you just respond to that?
Okay, before Prof comes in, the first question is...
The first question had to do with the animosity between the Northwest and the Southwest.
Between the Northwest and the Southwest. Prof will take us back to history because he's got a lot more of that, both in time and experience than I do. But let's remember that the concept of the Northwest and the Southwest, once again, a creation of the regime. Yes. There was no such concept as the Northwest and the Southwest at independence. Yeah. Now, that was not an accident. Yeah. That was deliberate. And it was deliberate to ensure that, I mean, divide and rule. That's where you start. So whatever has been a concept that was created is a concept that we can decreate. The Northwest and the Southwest exist because they made it that way. Now, there have been a lot of people who have pushed the argument that the Southwest happens to be richer, it's got the resources. I argue that that's false. It is not true when you look at the potential of the Northwest. Apart from Bamileke country, in terms of cultural richness and touristic potential, the Northwest, or at least what is known as the Northwest, is the one region that offers that. Now, you don't need to have natural resources in abundance to be a rich country. We know that Kenya has got probably the most stable economy, or one of the most stable economy, and growing on the continent based on no natural resources. Tourism happens to be one of them. We've heard about the Menchum Falls, which happens to have the power potential to generate electricity for the whole of West Africa. We've got a neighbor next to us that has got 200 million inhabitants. You don't need to have, with that alone, you can be a rich country. So when you look at the Northwest and its potential, and the fact that the regime has deliberately refused this potential to be exploited, it is not out of the lack of the possibility to be rich. It is, in my opinion, a ploy to ensure that what is known as the Southwest and its resources are completely plundered. And once that has happened, then we move to the other part. And then we just flip it and say, oh, the Northwest is richer. So the Southwesterners, they've got nothing. That's how you must regard them.
So you don't believe there is any form of animosity?
The form of animosity has been created. And that's why I say we can decreate, based on re-educating our people and getting them to understand that it's a lie. Now, the second question was
about the 11th province.
The 11th province. Listen, in every contention around borders, you will have people with relatives on both sides of that border. At the end of the day, you choose. And I can give you a clear example. There are lots of people who were related to South Africa and Namibia during the conflict between Namibia, or what was then Southwest Africa and South Africa today. They hold 2 passports. Nothing deprives an 11th province from holding 2 passports when the time comes. For me, that's not a non-issue.
Prof, quickly.
Okay, quickly. I would rather characterize this as a perceived animosity. Often it's an individual level. I don't think if you take the so-called Southwest, which means by definition from Mamfe right down to Victoria, all of that people put them together, they're against people from Bamida up to Nkambe. I don't see so. Of course, there are some worries. And the worries has to do more with demographics. They look at the population and they say the so-called Northwest is more populated than the Southwest. And because of the lived experience they've had with a Republic of Cameroon of domination and imposition and repression and oppression, they feel that if this thing is not taken care of, the chances are that you have a likely scenario happening in an independent southern Cameroon. But we've addressed that. Myself, Elad, and my friend Dr. Simon Munzo were members of the 1996 drafting committee of the Constitution in Cameroon. And we addressed this particular issue carefully, legally, and how this thing is going to be taken off to solve this particular problem. We are talking here about empowering people at different tiers of governance, at the local level, at the state level, and at much more national level. And we believe that when you empower people, you let local people have full control over themselves. You let local people have, other regional level or state level have full power and control over themselves and over the resources. It's going to resolve all these issues. We take care of that. The constitutional draft which you present to government, typically of the Yaoundé regime, of course, you threw that aside because, like my friend Achille has said, they are still following the Jacobin centralized system, which even in France itself has been rejected. The other question relating to the 11th province, and I remember the 11th province issue came up in our time when we created the AAC 1 and the AAC 2, and we set up the Southern Cameroon National Council. The 11th province has nothing to do with the fact that you have people who spill across the border. Because if that was the case, if you look at the Nigerian side, we have a lot of people from Njan area, from Mamfe area, right up to Nkambe, who also spill across the border. So that is not the problem. The problem is that we had people from French Cameroon who had come as refugees who had come seeking asylum in the British Southern Cameroon, and they were welcome and they settled there. And many of them have lived there ever since. They've had children ever since. They've intermarried ever since. And there was never any discrimination against them. And they had appointed position, even at a higher level. The Secretary General in the Prime Minister's office in Boya was not even a native Southern Cameroonian. It was one of the person we call 11 province people. Unfortunately, what happened was in 1972, when the Southern Cameroon was now officially annexed, and they carved out the Southern Cameroon into Southwest and Northwest, these people became now be able to go to the other side, the French Cameroon, and they began to identify the Aboriginal area. And they would say, oh, I came from Bassa area, let me look where I came from. I come from the Bamdeki area, let me look where I come from. Or I come from this area. That shocked most of us, because we had regarded these people as part of us. And we even elected them as MPs to Yaoundé this thing. So when this thing began to happen, we said, no. This looked like a betrayal. And one way we sought to solve this thing is to involve the so-called loving province people in our struggle for freedom. And many of them participate, and they still participate even up to today. So I don't see where the problem is. The world now is a globalized world. People are free to settle wherever they are. There are many people here in South Africa here who settle here who are not originally from here. There are many people in America who decide to settle there, they are not from there. There are many people who are in France, they are not originally from there. And that's how it's going to be. People are free to settle where they want to be and where they feel comfortable. However, what is going to happen as part of our value system, that there's not going to be any discrimination against anybody who decides to stay in the Southern Cameroon. Whether you are you call it what, 11th province or the 12th province or whatever. It's never going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we seem to have run out of time. And although there is still much to talk about, I don't think we'll be able to continue to take any further questions. But I think our panelists are still around to...
We are running out of time, but you can do a quick round of questions. But people, please keep it short. We need to be out of here.
Okay.
I just want to do a very quick one. And I want us to look beyond the Anglophone problem. If we go to the French-speaking Cameroon or to La République, you would find kids with no shoes. You find kids that don't go to school. You find people who live in broken houses. You find people who don't have food. If you go to the English-speaking side of Cameroon, you find exactly the same problems. And hence, I want to say it's not, it's bigger than an Anglophone problem. And my question is, do we really think a separation of both countries would solve our problems? Do we think it's a problem of the unity of the both countries? Is it a problem of governance or quality of governance? Or is it a problem of the international community that has failed to hold these governments accountable? And just to elaborate on that, we would ask the question, why does the IMF, why does the World Bank keep giving loans to La République, even though this money is being mismanaged, even though this money is being used to serve and reach certain people? Do we think when we separate, the new leadership that would be in place will not continue in that same spirit? And what I don't know how to put it, but what has been put in place to make sure that this does not actually carry out or does not continue when both countries separate? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Wambo Augustin from Cameroon. I would like to thank the speakers. My question is mostly addressed to Prof. Carson Anyangwe. I'm getting very worried when I listen to you, Prof, for two reasons. You seem to be having a language that is not helping the cause that you are trying to defend. I'm coming from the French-speaking part of Cameroon, not the French Cameroon. From the French-speaking part of Cameroon. I learn English. I really feel like part of the issues that we are trying to all of us address. But if you keep referring to them, we, me, him, just like our sister on my left was saying, I think we are having a very big problem. We still have a very long way to go before we find a solution to the issue. The second thing is that when I listened to you, back in the days when I was still a young student, during the All Anglophone conference that you were part of the organizing committee, I saw a very brilliant torchbearer. I think if you are able to go back to those dynamics back in those days, I think the case that you are making will get very stronger. And this is something that we all believe is doable within our lifetime. I believe that what Professor Achille Mbembe was mentioning about going back to our initial days before the Germans, I think this is something that we should entertain. And one thing that Mila also mentioned about restoration, not cessation, I think this is the element of language, to say it in French, that we should be using, not singling out A, B, C against each other. I think this is not very conducive in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we just take one last one here, sir?
Thank you for the opportunity. I am an activist. From what panelists have said, if we have to go deep beyond the colonization, we have to start from Adam and Eve. So we just have to start from where we can solve the problem. And there's some international organizations that can, let me say the court or the police, like the UN. It says, during decolonization, respect the boundaries. Respect the boundaries. I think that is where we need to start the problems. We need to start the problem. And speaking to you, brothers and sisters, the truth is, if you want to solve a problem, go into the root of the problem. Let us not play politics. If we sit here and play politics, people will die. There is a possibility of genocide as we're speaking with you now. There's a possibility of genocide. So if we sit here, maybe trying to deceive the world, that is this and that. These two people, for 56 years, examples have shown that they cannot live together. That is the truth. And the simple truth is there are two countries that were together. There are two different countries. The two countries had their governments, but because of the UN, and we are holding UN and the UN accountable and Britain for the mess that we find ourselves. That is the truth. The Cameroon government or whatever or whoever may be trying to deceive the world, but the truth has to prevail. And if the truth does not prevail, the truth must have to prevail. So please, it's a long history that you, brothers and sisters, you can go into research, you will find the truth and you will get the truth. So if we want to go from Adam and Eve, we know that we are one people, and we want to bring Africa into one. Well, there will still be boundaries for governance. There will still be boundaries for governance. So those boundaries, the international law say respect it. I think if we take from there, everybody respect the laws of the international organization, I think that problems can be solved. Thank you very much.
So if you can just
let me ask.
No, just a second.
I'll just. Yeah, the first thing is this whole story. Each time we hear this, we should go back to I don't know when, maybe to dark ages and start doing that. That cannot happen. The moment you accept the Westphalian state system, you are bound by it. Otherwise, the international system will just collapse. First answer. Second answer is, don't try to confine and define people by trying to critique their language. Because when you do that, you are trying to say you are abolishing, and that is precisely the point we're making, the issue of identity. I have an identity. You have no right to try to abolish that identity, which I have. Because even yourself, you've not abolished that your own identity. You insist and you practice your identity. So we must accept those things. Please, in this discussion, I'm inviting people to have an open mind on this whole thing. If we are one, as we're saying, the moment the regime Yaoundé send its troops, start killing, murdering people, raping people, arbitrarily arresting them, even the cutting of the internet, I've not seen any mass action from that French Cameroon, where people have said, this is wrong. And yet you can't. Of course, there have been individual voices. Some of them are a friend, and I can cite to them here. And one of them is here, who have opposed that. But that mass action is lacking, and I have not seen. And therefore, my last thing, what is the future of the entity which we call Cameroon? And I would suggest that the moment the Yaoundé regime started its horribly repressive action, killing and murdering people, arbitrarily arresting them, taking them to Yaoundé, of all places, in a gulag there. And the moment the cut of internet, and right now, as you all know, the wage war against the church, the Catholic priest, the Protestant priest, and all of this. The moment you go to that, Yaoundé has set itself on a perilous route for which is sliding down, and I don't see any hope of recovery. And I just see the people of the Southern Cameroon say, look, we've had enough here. We are going to reinstate ourselves. And then, even in La République Cameroon itself, I see trouble. Thank you.
Final remarks, Prof.
Yeah, very shortly. Look, I love making fun of myself. So, so I thank you for adding to that. We cannot, on the one hand, pretend that we want to take history seriously, and when it doesn't arrange that, we say, oh, we don't want to go to Adam and Eve. Okay, we have to be consistent. Either we have a historical consciousness, or we don't. That's my response to those who want to caricature the argument in terms of going back to pre-Adamic age. The reality is serious. You see, there are different views about this issue. And, we'll make our own choices. My hope is that we'll make our choices with our eyes wide open, not only to past experiences, but to other comparative experiences in our own times. But ultimately, it will be up to us to make those choices. And I just hope that they will not be too costly.
Okay. A question that was asked was about the fact that on both sides of the border there are children without shoes. That is true. I don't think that the debate has ever been the fact that misery does not exist on both sides of the border. And I think Professor Mbembe, when he spoke about the marginalization of different groupings of Cameroonians. He made mention of the Bassa, the Bamileke, whom we know are marginalized. But like Northern Cameroon, who not only are marginalized, but were decimated. They were decimated and killed in their numbers by the regime. Now, does that mean because we've got problems on both sides, those problems are the same? My response to that has always been, and I always give the analogy of apartheid in South Africa. The people in South Africa who suffered from apartheid suffered in categories. If you were Indian, you didn't suffer at the same level that you suffered as colored or as black. So you cannot then quantify the discrimination and the marginalization of all these groupings on the same pedestal. That is very important to note. Now, the question around international organizations and IMF and loans and the UN, and I've heard a lot of people talk about that. Let's get to the point where we start to recognize that our problems are our own and our interests are our own. We need to also recognize that a lot of these countries are looking after their interests, including the French. Now, they will not come and give us free lunch, so it is our responsibility to fix what is ours. And so we must look for the solutions amongst us. I have spent enough time working for these international organizations to understand how they operate, so I don't count on them. Now, the question of war and freedom, I wrote a paper about, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago that said Cameroon, and I think Prof has spoken about it, Cameroon as it is has a problem, and there is an explosion that sooner or later we need to expect. Malusi was talking about the struggles around the southern African part of the continent. That is why today many of these countries have got freedom in the true sense of the word, because they fought for it and they paid for it. We haven't. We are a mayonnaise of lies, which we need to fix before we can get there. And perhaps fixing it might require making some sacrifices. That is the nature of the beast. And therefore, we are looking at this beast and thinking to ourselves, do we really want to be part of this? And this now goes to the future of Cameroon. Remember that Cameroon and French Cameroon comes with a history, and it's a painful history that we must recognize. That history also comes with a relationship to a colonial power that continues to pull the strings very actively in terms of what that Cameroon is. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to continuously be part of this burden that was never ours in the first place? Or do we want to break ourselves from that burden because we do not historically have a relationship with the French? For me, then it then goes to the question, are we then breaking ourselves, cutting away from our brothers and sisters on the other side? I don't think that is the issue necessarily. The issue is, do we all want to cut away, break away from this French stranglehold on us? And if we feel, and that's why Prof was saying, ever since this thing has begun, it seems as if on the other side, and one thing that actually ticked me to start saying we need to do something was when we met friends of ours, and spoke to them, and she came back from home and like, listen, how are things at home? She's like, okay, it's okay. Like, but what? But we hear about things. And she's like, oh, it's happening on your side of the country. Now, that is very easy. Now, we are either going to fix this problem together, or we will fix our problems for us, because for us, we begin to see, especially because in this whole relationship, we've been marginalized. And like I said, there is a deliberate policy of eradication. Now, based on all of this, I still believe that we can potentially find solutions, but those solutions must require good faith on both sides. And when you've gone through 56 years of dealing with, we have this tendency of generalizing. It's not everybody. It's a regime that's representative of certain interests. However, if we think that this is our problem collectively, then I am very, very keen to see that collectively we start to fight that regime and the power that fits the regime.
As closing remarks, I was just, if we all agree actually that the old political dispensation has fallen short of what it takes, of what we expected, and has brought untold suffering and hardship and pain, then, and the only way to actually solve this problem is a restitution of the southern Cameroons. Is there no political hidden agenda of the people we say form part of the Cameroon, of the southern Cameroons that we're talking about, of which part of them is the international community, where we have to run to? Is there no hidden agenda in that they actually want to see these two sisters, brothers, going into loggerheads? It also raises the question of the non-legitimization of the political elite from the southern Cameroons, which on several occasions when the crisis started, the government actually dispatched them to actually help solve the problem. But when they got there, especially from the PM and others, when they got there, they came back with no results. This actually poses a serious problem, and that is why this problem has actually come to a stage whereby there is no going back. It is only going forward. It is only going forward because the people have actually realized that those that are there are not saving the interests of the masses. They are saving their own interests and those that are in power. Thank you.
Just one thing quickly. Yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. Agenda. It's come up a couple of times and you said it, and I'm thinking we would be leaving from here without talking about something. You asked the question, whose agenda is it? And he has raised it, and it goes back to something that I said earlier, and I was thinking, let's not leave from here with a mixed message. I was on a radio interview where somebody called and said, this argument that you're putting forth, you don't have the capacity to think like this. There are foreign powers which are advising you. Now, this is very crucial. Once this, and you made mention of international communities and whose agenda, it is very simple. People who have gone through a system of eradication for 56 years, whether you like it or not. The French Revolution, the American Revolution was about the price of salt. All you need is one little drop of water in the bucket and it goes. So it's nobody's agenda but the people who are fed up and have decided that they will no longer follow the elite. They will pave their own path. Thank you.
So at this point, please permit me to thank our panelists for their insightful comments, inputs, and arguments that they've made, and also to appreciate the contribution from the audience. I think we are all very grateful that we've used this forum to try to enlighten one another and try to understand the issues better than we knew them. And as I said in the beginning, I think key to this debate tonight is to contribute to what I believe is necessary, a national dialogue. Because to me, that is the greatest contribution that the protests have brought to once again bring these issues onto the national agenda, that we can talk about them and look for a solution together, especially in the context of upcoming elections. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to try to look at how to address the fundamental questions that continue to confront the Cameroonian state. So please join me, give a round of applause to our panelists again. Finally, I want to call on our head of department to just give a final word of thanks.
Prof,